Two men arrived at the gates of heaven and knocked. One was a millionaire, clean, composed, carrying nothing but his memories. The other a beggar, barefoot, weary, and trembling with the weight of his suffering. The gates shone like breathing light, and for a long moment nothing happened. Then, from within the radiance, a voice spoke a single name: the millionaire. The angel stepped forward, opened the gates, and motioned for him to enter. The beggar waited, his hands clasped, his eyes wet with hope. But when he tried to follow, the angel raised its hand and stood in front of him. "Not you," the angel said softly. The beggar froze. His heart pounded like thunder in the silence of eternity. God had chosen the millionaire. And the beggar, the one who had suffered, prayed, and given everything, was left standing outside the gates of heaven. No one spoke. No one explained. And that is where the story begins. Because everyone who hears it will ask the same question. Why him? Why not the beggar? Beyond the clouds, where earthly weather ceased to matter, there existed a light that had no source and cast no shadow. It was neither warm nor cold, neither bright nor dim, it simply was. In the way that eternity simply is, without beginning or explanation, the gates stood there, wrought from something that might have been pearl or might have been starlight, their surface shifting like oil on water whenever one tried to focus too closely. They made no sound, these gates, though the air around them hummed with a frequency just beyond human hearing, like the memory of every bell that had ever rung on Christmas morning. Two men arrived at the same moment, though they had walked very different paths to reach this place. The first stood slightly hunched, his clothes bearing the patina of 1,000 nights spent beneath bridges and in doorways. His coat, which might once have been navy blue, had faded to the color of twilight, and his shoes were held together more by habit than by leather. His hands, gnarled and spotted with age, trembled slightly, not from cold, for there was no cold here, but from the weight of arriving at a destination he had both longed for and feared. His eyes, rheumy and gray as winter seas, blinked slowly as they took in the impossible architecture of eternity. The second man stood straighter, though not from pride, but from a lifetime of bearing responsibility on shoulders that had learned not to slump. His suit was modest, not the ostentation of new money, but the quiet quality of someone who had learned that true wealth whispered rather than shouted. His hair, silver white and neatly trimmed, caught the strange light and held it like frost on window panes. His hands were steady, marked by a gold wedding band worn thin from decades of turning it during moments of thought. They looked at each other, these two men who had never met in life, but who recognized something fundamental in each other's eyes, the recognition that the long journey was over, that whatever came next was beyond their control. The silence stretched between them like taffy, sweet and strange, until it was broken by a sound that was not quite footsteps and not quite wind. The angel appeared not suddenly but gradually, the way dawn appears, so that afterward neither man could say exactly when the presence had arrived. The being was composed of light that had weight and substance, features that shifted between male and female, young and ancient, all races and none. When it spoke, its voice contained echoes of every loving word ever spoken, every lullaby ever sung, every prayer ever whispered in the dark. Thomas Andrew Hartley. The millionaire, for that is what the well-dressed man was, though the term seemed absurdly small in this place, stepped forward. His movement was neither eager nor reluctant, but carried the quiet dignity of someone answering a call they had always known would come. The gates opened, not with a creak or a flourish, but with a sensation like breathing, as if the universe itself had exhaled. Beyond them lay not clouds and harps, as Sunday school pictures suggested, but something far more profound, a garden that seemed to contain every garden that had ever bloomed, a city that held every home where love had dwelt, a vast expanse that was somehow both infinite and intimate. The smell that drifted through was indescribable. It contained pine needles and baking bread, ocean spray and library dust, newborn skin and autumn leaves, all woven together into something that made both men's eyes fill with tears they didn't understand. Thomas walked through. The gates closed with the same breathing sensation, and the beggar remained outside, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with a confusion that quickly crystallized into something sharper. "Wait," he said, and his voice cracked like ice on a pond. "There must be. Surely there's been... .. quotes. The angel turned to him, its expression unreadable as moonlight on water. The angel did not argue. Instead, heaven itself began to answer, not in words, but in memories. But before the beggar could speak again, the air around them shifted, and suddenly they were no longer quite at the gates, but somehow beside them, in a space that existed adjacent to everywhere and nowhere. The angel raised one hand, or what might have been a hand, and the light began to coalesce into images, into memories pulled from the quantum foam of time itself. December 23rd, 15 years ago. The scene materialized like breath on cold glass, gradually revealing what lay beyond. A diner, one of those 24-hour places with cracked vinyl seats and fluorescent lights that hummed in B-flat. Outside, snow fell in thick, lazy flakes that turned the parking lot into a page waiting to be written upon. The smell materialized first coffee that had been sitting too long on the warmer, mixing with the grease from the grill and the sweet chemical scent of cherry pie under heat lamps. Thomas sat alone in a corner booth, papers spread before him, the remnants of a business dinner he'd excused himself from early. He was younger here, his hair more pepper than salt, the lines around his eyes not yet etched so deep. He wore an expensive suit, but he'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, revealing a watch that cost more than most people's cars. The waitress approached with a coffee pot. Her name tag read Maria, and beneath the fluorescent lights, the exhaustion on her face was impossible to miss. Her feet, swollen insensible shoes, made a soft shuffling sound against the linoleum she like a tired lullaby. She'd been on her feet for 14 hours, covering a double shift because her colleague's child was sick, and she still had another 4 hours to go. More coffee, hun. Her voice carried a practiced cheerfulness that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thomas looked up from his papers, really looked, not the cursory glance most customers gave. He saw the tremor in her hand holding the pot, the way she shifted her weight from foot to foot, seeking relief that wouldn't come. The small stain on her uniform she'd tried to cover with her order pad. Actually, he said, closing his laptop slowly, why don't you sit for a moment? You look like you could use a break. She laughed, but it was hollow, like wind through empty rooms. Can't, hun. Manager's rules. But thanks for... I'll have one of everything on the menu, Thomas said quietly. That should keep you busy enough that you won't get in trouble for sitting while you write it all down. Maria stared at him. One of ... everything? Everything, and please, sit. My handwriting is terrible, you'll need to help me make sure the order's right. She sat slowly, as if her body had forgotten how the action worked. The vinyl seat wheezed beneath her, and she let out a small sigh that contained the weight of the world. Thomas pushed a glass of water toward her, and she took it with hands that shook slightly. They sat there for 20 minutes, going through the menu item by item, Thomas insisting on detailed descriptions of each dish while Maria gradually relaxed, her real smile emerging like sun through clouds. When they finished, Thomas handed her the order slip back. Actually, just the coffee is fine, he said. But this is for you. He placed 5 $100 bills on the table, for the most detailed order never placed. Maria's eyes filled. I can't. It's Christmas, Thomas said simply. And you have kids to buy presents for, don't you? I can see the catalog in your apron pocket. She did cry then, quietly, trying to hide it with her order pad. Thomas reached across the table and touched her hand briefly, his skin warm and dry against her fingers, rough from too much sanitizer and dish soap. Why? She whispered. Thomas smiled, and in that smile was a sadness the angel watching the memory understood, but the beggar could not quite grasp. Because I can. Because you need it. Because 20 years ago I was sleeping in my car, and a waitress in a diner like this one let me sit in a booth all night nursing 1 cup of coffee when she could have thrown me out. Her name was Maria too. Different Maria, but ... double quotes, he shrugged. The universe rhymes sometimes. The memory dissolved at the edges, but the feeling of it lingered. The warmth of unexpected kindness, the smell of coffee and hope, the sound of Maria laughing, really laughing for the first time in months. April 17th, 11 years ago. Rain. The memory began with rain, the kind that fell straight down like strings connecting heaven to earth. The sound of it filled the space, not harsh but steady, patient, like tears that had finally been given permission to fall. The location materialized. An underpass in the city, that nowhere space where the forgotten gathered to remember what it was like to be dry. Thomas was there, though he shouldn't have been. His driver had taken a wrong turn, the GPS confused by construction, and they'd ended up in a part of the city that appeared on no tourist maps. The Mercedes idled, its engine purring expensively while rain drummed on the roof in a rhythm that was almost musical. Just turn around here, Thomas had said. But then he'd seen them. A gathering of people beneath the overpass, pressed against the concrete pillars like barnacles against a pier. The smell reached him even through the closed windows, wet cloth and unwashed bodies, the sour tongue of survival without dignity. Stop the car. Sir, this isn't... Stop the car, James. Thomas got out. and immediately the rain soaked through his coat that cost more than some people made in a month. He didn't run for shelter but walked steadily toward the gathering, his footsteps splashing through puddles that reflected the gray sky like broken mirrors. There were perhaps 20 people there, men mostly, but some women too, and Thomas's heart clenched. 2 children, a boy and a girl, perhaps 6 and 8, pressed against a woman who might have been their mother or might have been simply another soul trying to protect the innocent in a world that had forgotten them. Thomas approached slowly, his hands visible, understanding that sudden movements here could mean danger. The crowd watched him with eyes that had learned to assess threat and opportunity in equal measure. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, and his voice carried despite the rain. "I took a wrong turn, but maybe it was the right turn after all." An old man, his beard yellowed with nicotine and age, laughed bitterly. "Ain't no right turns lead here, friend." "Perhaps not," Thomas agreed. I am, and I'm wondering, when did you all last eat?" Silence, suspicious and heavy. "There's a grocery store 2 blocks over," Thomas continued, "still open. What if we all of us went shopping?" "They won't let us in," a woman said, her voice flat with the exhaustion of being turned away too many times. "They will if you're with me," Thomas said simply. "And if we're shopping, not loitering. Come on." The rain's not getting any lighter. What followed was surreal, a procession of the forgotten following a millionaire through the rain, their footsteps creating a percussion against the sidewalk. At the store, Thomas grabbed a cart, then another, then another. "Get what you need," he said. "Food, toiletries, whatever. Don't look at prices." The security guard started forward, but Thomas intercepted him, speaking quietly, his credit card already out. The guard hesitated, made a call, nodded. For an hour they shopped. The children, wide-eyed, reached for cereal boxes with cartoon characters. The adults moved more carefully, choosing canned goods that would last, protein bars that wouldn't spoil. The woman who might have been the children's mother stood in the pharmacy aisle, staring at children's cough medicine as if it were the Holy Grail. "Get 3 bottles," Thomas said quietly beside her. "Children get sick often. Better to be prepared." She looked at him with eyes that had forgotten how to trust. "Why are you doing this?" Thomas picked up a bottle of vitamins, studying the label as if it contained profound truths. "My mother used to say that angels come disguised as strangers. She was wrong, I think. Strangers come disguised as angels. We just have to learn to see the wings." The total at the checkout was staggering. The cashier, a young man with acne and a nervous laugh, had to call a manager to approve it. Thomas paid without blinking, but he did something else too. He hired the old man with the yellowed beard to help load the groceries, paying him $50 for 10 minutes work. He asked the woman with the children if she could help him with some filing at his office, creating a job that didn't exist but would after that night. He collected phone numbers on the backs of receipts, making promises he would keep. The memory faded with the sound of rain and the image of Thomas standing under the overpass again, helping distribute the groceries. His expensive coat soaked through and somehow transformed into something more valuable than its price tag had ever suggested. December 24th, 7 years ago, Christmas Eve. This memory began with laughter, the kind that only children can produce, pure and unforced, like bells made of joy. The scene was a lot in a poor neighborhood, the kind of place where broken glass grew like deadly flowers and nobody went after dark. But on this Christmas Eve, it had been transformed. The playground rose from the empty lot like a prayer answered in primary colors. Swings with seats that weren't cracked, slides that gleamed without rust, a jungle gym that invited climbing instead of threatening tetanus. But it was more than that. The entire lot had been transformed. Where trash had accumulated, now there were gardens waiting for spring. Where dealers had conducted business, now there were benches where grandmothers could watch their grandchildren play. Light posts, real ones that worked, stood sentinel at each corner. Thomas stood at the edge of the celebration, trying to remain invisible, but the children had other ideas. They pulled him toward the swings. These children, who had learned too young that the world was hard, but had not yet forgotten how to hope. "Push me, mister. Push me higher." A little girl, perhaps 5, with braids that bounced as she pumped her legs. Thomas pushed gently, and she soared, her laughter trailing behind her like a comet's tail. The sound of it mixed with the other sounds of that evening, parents talking softly, sharing wonder that something beautiful had appeared in their neighborhood without strings or conditions. Teenagers shooting basketballs through nets that weren't torn, the creak of swings drawing lines of joy through the air. The smell of the evening materialized in the memory, fresh mulch that would keep children safe if they fell. The green scent of new sod, and somehow, though there was no explanation for it, the smell of cookies baking. as several mothers had spontaneously decided to bring treats to share with whoever had done this miraculous thing.
It was you, wasn't it?
The voice belonged to James Washington, a pastor whose church stood across from the lot. Its windows boarded not from abandonment, but from rocks thrown by those who had given up on faith. He was a tall man, thin from giving away too many of his own meals, his eyes carrying the weight of shepherding a flock in a valley of more shadows than light. Thomas turned, tried to deny it, but James knew. They all knew somehow. The contractor let it slip, James said. Said a man paid cash for everything, insisted it be done by Christmas Eve. Said the man made him promise not to reveal who. But contractors aren't priests. They don't keep confessions. Well, it doesn't matter who. It does, James interrupted. It matters because you didn't put your name on it. Do you know how rare that is, anonymous good? Good that doesn't want credit or tax write-offs or a plaque with a name on it. Thomas watched the children play. One boy, probably 8, was helping a younger child climb the jungle gym, patient and encouraging. My son would have been 23 this year, Thomas said quietly. Car accident 15 years ago. Christmas Eve. James said nothing, understanding that sometimes grief needed space to breathe. He loved playgrounds, Thomas continued. Even as a teenager, he'd still go to them, sit on the swings at night and think. Said it helped him solve problems, that rhythm of back and forth. After he died, I couldn't bear to see playgrounds. Then one day I realized I was dishonoring his memory by avoiding them. So now I build them. One every Christmas Eve, in a place that needs one. How many? This is the 7th. The memory held there for a moment. The sound of children playing as snow began to fall. Fat flakes that caught the new lights and turned the playground into something from a snow globe. Thomas stood with the pastor, 2 men watching hope take root in concrete soil. While mothers called children in for dinner and promised they could come back tomorrow, and the tomorrow after that, and all the tomorrows they wanted. September 3rd, 4 years ago. This memory was quieter, more intimate. It materialized in shades of amber and gold afternoon light streaming through hospital windows, turning dust motes into tiny dancers. The smell was antiseptic, trying to mask something deeper, that particular hospital mixture of industrial cleaning products, cafeteria food, and the indefinable scent of human endings and beginnings. Thomas sat beside a bed in the hospice wing. The woman in the bed was ancient, her skin like parchment paper that might tear if touched too roughly. Her breathing shallow but steady. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and she had no one. No family still living, no friends who hadn't already made this same journey, no one to hold her hand as she approached the door that everyone must walk through alone. Except Thomas was there holding that hand, his thumb gently stroking the paper-thin skin while he read to her from a book of poetry she'd mentioned loving when she was young. How did you know I was here? She'd asked when he first appeared. I volunteered, Thomas had said simply. I sit with people who are ... traveling. Dying, you mean? Traveling, he insisted gently. Just going ahead to set up camp for the rest of us. She had laughed, a sound like autumn leaves rustling. You don't know me. I know you were a teacher, Thomas said. 3rd grade, 40 years. I know you never married, but you loved once, deeply. I know you're afraid not of dying, but of being forgotten. Eleanor's eyes, cloudy with cataracts, had sharpened. How could you possibly know that? Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, old and creased. Because 35 years ago you taught a scared little boy whose parents had just divorced. You kept him after school every day, not for detention, but to help him with homework his parents were too broken to care about. You gave him lunch money from your own pocket. You told him he was smart, that he could be anything he wanted. That boy was me. Eleanor studied his face, looking for the child she'd known. Tommy, little Tommy Hartley. But you moved away, ... double quotes I did, but I never forgot. And when I heard you were here, ... he squeezed her hand gently. You won't be forgotten, Mrs. Vance, I promise. For 3 weeks, Thomas came every day. He read to her, brought her flowers, daisies, which she'd mentioned loving, played music on his phone from the decades she'd lived through. He collected her stories and typed them up, creating a book of her memories. When she worried about her cat, Mr. Whiskers, Thomas brought the cat to visit, smuggling him in inside his coat, rules be damned. On her last day, she was barely conscious, but she squeezed his hand. I'm scared, Tommy, she whispered. I know, he said, and his voice was steady even as tears ran down his cheeks. But you know what? I think it's like the first day of school. Scary at first, but then you realize everyone's there to help you learn something new. She smiled, and in that smile was every 3rd grader she'd ever comforted. You turned out good, Tommy, because you taught me how The memory held on her last breath, which wasn't a gasp or a struggle but a gentle release, like setting down something heavy after a long carry. Thomas stayed with her body for an hour afterward, making sure she wasn't alone even then, understanding that dignity extends beyond the last heartbeat. The memories faded like morning mist, leaving the beggar and the angel standing in that strange space beside the gates. The beggar's face had changed during the viewing, anger giving way to confusion, then to something deeper and more complex. "I don't understand," he said, his voice rough as sandpaper. He was wealthy. He had everything. I thought the rules were clear. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. I know those words. I memorized them when I thought I could buy my way in with poverty. The angel's expression shifted like clouds across the moon. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of every judgment ever made and unmade. "Tell me your story, Marcus Chun." The beggar Marcus startled at hearing his true name, the one he hadn't used in 5 years, not since he'd abandoned everything in a desperate gambit to earn salvation through suffering. "You know my story," Marcus said bitterly. "You're an angel. You know everything." "I know," the angel agreed. "But you need to tell it. Not for me, but for the weight of it to be measured. Speak, and let the gates hear who you really are." Marcus stood straighter, and for a moment the rags he wore seemed to shimmer, as if remembering the suits they had replaced. His voice, when he began, carried traces of boardrooms and conference calls, of numbers that moved markets and decisions that affected millions. 20 years ago. The memory that formed was different from Thomas's, sharper, colder, lit by the blue glow of computer screens rather than warm afternoon light. The sound was keyboards clicking like expensive insects, phones ringing with the persistence of demanding children, the whisper of paper that represented billions of dollars changing hands. Marcus stood at the window of his office, 40 floors above the city. He was 35 then, already worth more than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, and hungry for more, not more money exactly, but more of the feeling that money brought. Power, control, the ability to move through the world untouched by the limitations that bound ordinary people. The city below looked like a circuit board, lights traveling along predetermined paths. People were dots, their problems invisible from this height, their struggles academic. Marcus liked it up here. It was clean, mathematical, pure. Mr. Chun. The acquisition papers for Mercy General. His assistant, Rebecca, stood in the doorway. She was efficient, invisible in the way he preferred his employees to be, present when needed, absent when not. She placed the papers on his desk, a hospital's fate reduced to signatures and appendices. "The board is resistant," she said. "They claim the hospital serves a critical need in the community. 40% of their patients are uninsured, which is why they're failing," Marcus said without turning from the window. "Sentiment doesn't pay bills. We'll gut the unprofitable departments, convert half the building to private practice spaces, triple the parking fees. The EURS stays but becomes private pay only. The community will adapt, sir. The cancer ward specifically serves children the children will go elsewhere." He turned then, and his eyes were like winter mornings, bright and cold. "There's always elsewhere, Rebecca. That's what makes the market beautiful. It finds equilibrium." She left and Marcus signed the papers. Within 6 months, Mercy General was transformed. Profitable, efficient. A machine that turned illness into income with remarkable precision. The children's cancer ward became a plastic surgery center. The ER, now private pay only, saw a 90% reduction in admissions. 43 people died that year who wouldn't have if the old Mercy General had still existed, but those deaths didn't appear on any spreadsheet Marcus reviewed. 15 years ago, another memory crystallized. Marcus at a charity gala, the kind where a single table cost more than a teacher's yearly salary. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers that threw light like scattered diamonds. The sound was laughter that tinkled like champagne glasses. Conversations that danced around money without ever saying the crude word itself. The smell was perfume worth thousands an ounce, mixing with food that would mostly go uneaten because the women were dieting and the men were more interested in deals than dinner. Marcus stood at the podium, his donation, $10 million, projected on screens around the room. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. The charity dedicated to ending homelessness praised him as a visionary, a humanitarian, an example of how wealth could be wielded for good. What the cameras didn't capture was the conversation afterward, in the quiet of the coat check room where Marcus met with the charity's director. Of course, Marcus was saying the donation comes with some stipulations. The housing units you build, I'll need naming rights. The Marcus Chun Centers for Transitional Living. And I'll need detailed reports on every resident. Financial history, criminal records, family connections. My foundation needs to ensure we're helping the right sort of people. Mr. Chun, our policy is to help without judgment. Your policy is whatever I say it is for $10 million, Marcus said quietly. His smile never wavered, but his eyes were like scanners calculating the exact price of a human conscience. Oh, and one more thing. The locations for these centers, I have some suggestions. Areas where my company happens to own adjacent properties. Amazing how social improvement can increase property values, isn't it? The director agreed. What choice did he have? $10 million could help thousands. So what if Marcus would make $50 million from the increased property values? So what if the wrong sort of homeless, the visibly mentally ill, the drug addicted, the ones who couldn't be cleaned up for photo opportunities were turned away? The memory lingered on Marcus leaving the gala, his limousine passing a man sleeping in a doorway not 3 blocks from the hotel. The man was wearing a veteran's jacket, holding a sign that said, "Anything helps. God bless." Marcus didn't see him. The windows were tinted and he was already on a call to Hong Kong, where the markets were just opening. 10 years ago, Christmas Eve. This memory hurt to watch, even for the angel who had seen every variety of human cruelty. It was intimate, personal, the kind of wound that never fully heals. Marcus's son, David, 16 years old, standing in the doorway of the home office where Marcus worked even on Christmas Eve. The boy was thin, angular, wearing an expensive sweater that somehow made him look more fragile rather than less. "Dad, Mom says dinner's ready." 5 more minutes, you said that an hour ago. Marcus looked up, irritated. The Hong Kong markets were volatile, and every minute could mean millions gained or lost. "David, you're old enough to understand. This is how we afford the life you enjoy. The private school, the cars, the vacation homes. Money doesn't take holidays. I'd rather have a father who did." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus's fingers paused on the keyboard. "That's a childish sentiment," he said finally. "When you're older, when I'm older, I'll be just like you, right?" David's voice cracked. Cold. Empty. Calculating the value of everything, including your own family. "Do you know what I told my girlfriend? I told her my father loves me approximately 70% as much as he loves his portfolio, because I'm a worse investment. Lower returns. David, Merry Christmas, Dad. I'm sure the Asian markets appreciate your dedication more than we do." The boy left. Marcus turned back to his screens, but the numbers blurred. He told himself David would understand when he inherited everything, when he realized the weight of maintaining wealth. He told himself he was being a good father by securing his son's financial future. 6 months later, David attempted suicide. The note he left was brief. "I'd rather be nothing than become him." David survived, barely. Marcus paid for the best treatment, the best facilities. He even visited once. They sat in a sunny room that smelled of industrial disinfectant, trying to hide itself beneath lavender air freshener, and neither could find words that bridged the gulf between them. Marcus left after 15 minutes, claiming an urgent call. He never went back. 5 years ago, the transformation. This memory was different. It flickered like a film with damaged frames, jumping between moments without smooth transitions. Marcus, standing in his empty penthouse, his wife's lawyers having taken half of everything, his son having refused any contact for years. The space echoed with each footstep. $60 million of real estate that felt like a tomb. The call from his doctor. "Mr. Chun, the tests are conclusive. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. With aggressive treatment, perhaps a year." The irony wasn't lost on him, all that money. And his own body was the one asset he couldn't leverage, couldn't trade, couldn't optimize. He tried, of course. Flew to Switzerland, to Mexico, to any clinic that promised miracles for the right price. But death, it seemed, was the one market force that couldn't be manipulated. It was during a treatment in Thailand, lying in a bed that cost $10,000 a night, that Marcus had his revelation, or what he thought was a revelation. The chaplain who came to visit Marcus hadn't requested him, but the man came anyway, spoke of redemption through poverty. The rich young ruler, the chaplain said, was told to sell everything and give to the poor. Only then could he follow the path to salvation. Marcus, desperate for any transaction that could buy him more than time, latched onto this like a drowning man to driftwood. If wealth was the barrier, he would destroy it. If poverty was the key, he would embrace it. It was just another deal, another optimization. He could game this system like he'd gamed all the others. He liquidated everything. Not gradually, but in a frenzy, selling at losses that would have killed him if he weren't already dying. But here's where the memory turned dark. where the angel watching saw what Marcus himself had never admitted. He didn't give it to the poor. Not really. Oh, he made donations. Visible ones. Ones that made headlines. Dying billionaire gives away fortune. But the money went to established charities where he knew it would be absorbed by administrative costs, where it would help in abstract ways that required no real connection to human suffering. He kept none of it, true, but he also made sure it would never truly transform lives the way Thomas's quiet gifts had. Then came the final act. Marcus chose to become homeless. Not gradually, not naturally, but as a performance. He bought rags from a costume shop. He practiced his beggar's voice in the mirror. He chose his spots carefully, visible enough to be seen suffering, safe enough to avoid real danger. But the cancer went into remission. A miracle, the doctors said, though they couldn't explain it. Marcus took it as a sign that his performance was working. God was fooled. The gates would open for this false pauper who had gamed the system of salvation itself. For 5 years he lived this lie. Sleeping in doorways but always near police stations. Eating from trash cans but only after watching someone throw away fresh food. Wearing rags but keeping a locker at the bus station with clean clothes for emergencies. He suffered, yes, but it was curated suffering, controlled suffering, suffering with an exit strategy. He never once sat with another homeless person and heard their story. Never shared his last dollar with someone who needed it more. Never offered comfort to another soul freezing in the winter. His poverty was solitary, selfish, as calculating as his wealth had been. He was a tourist in destitution, wearing misery like a costume he could remove if things got too real. The memory faded and Marcus stood exposed in that strange light beside the gates, his rags no longer a disguise but a shroud of his own making. His voice when he spoke was different, the polished tones of the boardroom mixing with the practiced rasp of the street to create something that belonged nowhere. But I gave it up, he said, and his words were desperate now, scrambling for purchase on a cliff face of his own construction. All of it, every penny. I suffered. I starved. I slept in the cold. I did what was asked. I followed the rules. The angel's form shifted, and for a moment, it seemed to contain multitudes, every person Marcus had failed to see, failed to help, failed to recognize as human. You followed rules, the angel agreed, its voice neither harsh nor gentle, but simply true. But whose rules, and for what purpose? The Bible's rules, God's rules. To earn, Marcus stopped, hearing his own words. To earn salvation. To earn. The angel moved closer, and Marcus could smell something impossible. Every tear never shed for another's pain. A bitter scent like iron and salt. Tell me, Marcus Chun, in all your poverty, did you ever once forget yourself in service to another? Did you ever give not from surplus but from necessity? Did you ever see God in the face of a stranger, or only a mirror in which to admire your own sacrifice? Marcus wanted to answer, wanted to defend himself, but the words crumbled in his throat. He thought of Thomas in that diner, genuinely seeing Maria's exhaustion. He thought of Thomas in the rain, shopping with people whose names he bothered to learn. He thought of Thomas holding Eleanor's hand as she died, present not for cosmic credit, but because she needed to not be alone. I was trying, Marcus whispered. I was trying to be good. No, the angel said, and its voice carried infinite sadness. You were trying to be saved. There is a difference as vast as the space between stars. Then I'm damned. Marcus's voice broke completely now, the businessman and the beggar both dissolving into something raw, more real than either had been. All of it for nothing? The suffering, the sacrifice? The suffering was real, the angel acknowledged. But suffering alone has never been the key to these gates. If it were, every torture victim would be a saint, every cancer patient a prophet. Suffering can teach, can transform, can break open the heart, but only if the heart allows itself to be broken for others. Was then that snow began to fall in that impossible space beside the gates. Not earthly snow, but something finer, each flake a crystallized moment of grace offered and refused, of love given without condition, of sacrifice made in silence. The snow made no sound as it fell, but it carried sound within it, every Christmas carol ever sung with feeling. Every prayer whispered for another's well-being, every laugh shared in genuine joy rather than politeness. The angel stood still as the snow gathered on its form, making it seem more solid and more ethereal simultaneously. Marcus remained on his knees, the snow settling on his shoulders like a benediction he didn't deserve but desperately needed. Through the gates, which were somehow both closed and transparent, they could see Thomas. He wasn't in some cloudy paradise, but in a garden that seemed both infinite and intimate. He was planting something, seeds or bulbs, his hands deep in soil that looked rich and dark. Others were there too, People Marcus didn't recognize but whom the angel knew. Maria the waitress, now young and vibrant, laughing as she helped Thomas plant. Eleanor Vance, no longer ancient but somehow ageless, reading poetry aloud that made the plants grow faster. The children from the playground, eternal children now, playing on swings that went impossibly high, their laughter the music of the spheres. But Thomas wasn't looking at any of them. He was looking back through the gates directly at Marcus, and his expression was unreadable. "He sees me?" Marcus asked. "They all see you," the angel said. "The question is, do you see them? Not as abstractions, not as opportunities for transaction, but as they truly are?" Marcus looked, really looked, and for the first time he saw. Maria wasn't just a waitress who had received charity, but a mother who had stayed up all night with sick children. A woman who had given her last $5 to a homeless man the day before Thomas met her. A soul who had chosen kindness even when the world had shown her little. Eleanor wasn't just a dying teacher, but a universe of stories. Each student she'd taught carrying a piece of her forward. Her influence rippling through generations like stones thrown in an infinite pond. "I see them," Marcus whispered. "I see them, and I see what I never was. A person who forgot that people are people." The angel moved, and suddenly Marcus could hear something, bells, faint and distant, not from heaven but from earth. Christmas bells from 1,000 churches, 1,000,000 homes, from every place where love was choosing to manifest despite the darkness of the world. "The gates are not locked," the angel said softly. "They never have been. They open from the inside, from a heart that opens itself." Thomas opened his heart long before he died, made room for others inside it. The gates simply recognized what was already true. "And me?" Marcus asked. "Is my heart too calcified, too small, too late?" Instead of answering, the angel reached out and touched Marcus's chest. The touch was like lightning and like whisper, like ice and like fire. Marcus gasped and felt something crack inside him, not breaking but breaking open, like an egg releasing life, like a seed splitting to allow growth. Suddenly, Marcus could feel everything. Every person he'd evicted from Mercy General, their fear and pain. Every homeless person turned away from his conditional charity, their dignity wounded worse than their hunger. His son's loneliness, an ache that had shaped itself into a tempted ending. His wife's gradual numbing as she realized she was married to a calculation rather than a man. But he could feel other things too. The potential for redemption that existed in every moment. The infinite possibility of choosing differently. The weight of love that Thomas had carried, not as burden but as wings. "I understand," Marcus said, and his voice was different now, neither the billionaire nor the beggar, but something new, something being born in the snow of heaven. It was never about earning, it was about becoming. Becoming real, becoming love, becoming the space where God could dwell. The angel stepped back, and Marcus realized he was standing, though he didn't remember rising. His rags were transforming. Not into rich clothes, but into something simpler, neither wealth nor poverty, but just covering, just enough, just human. The transformation was not instantaneous, but gradual, like ice melting into water, like dawn dissolving night. Marcus felt the weight of his false poverty lifting. But something else remained, the weight of all he had been, all he had done, all he had failed to do. "What happens now?" he asked, and his voice was small, genuine, stripped of all pretense. The angel's form began to shift, becoming less defined, more like mist catching light. "That depends on what you truly learned. Not what you can recite, but what has been written on your heart." A new memory formed, unbidden. Not from Marcus's past, but from a moment he had never witnessed. 3 years ago, a hospital room. David Chun sat beside a window, his wrists still bandaged from his second attempt. The psychiatric ward was painted in colors meant to be soothing, soft greens and blues, but they only made the space feel more artificial, like happiness prescribed rather than earned. A social worker had asked him about his father. "He thinks everything is a transaction," David had said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Even love. Especially love. I kept trying to earn enough of whatever currency he was trading in good grades, athletic achievements, proper behavior. But the exchange rate kept changing. I could never save enough to matter." The social worker. An older woman named Patricia, who had seen too many broken children of wealthy parents, had asked gently, "Do you think he loves you?" David had been silent for a long time, watching snow fall outside the window. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a sadness older than his years. "I think he loves the idea of having a son, the portfolio diversification of fatherhood. But me? The actual me? I'm not sure he's ever met me. The memory shifted. Patricia visiting David's father, trying one last time to build a bridge. Mr. Chun, your son is asking for you. He's doing better, but he needs... I've arranged for the best treatment. Marcus had interrupted, not looking up from his computer. Private facility, top psychiatrists. Whatever he needs financially, he needs his father. Marcus's hands had paused on the keyboard just for a moment. I'm giving him what I can give, but not what he needs. I don't know how to give what I don't have, Marcus had said quietly, and for just a moment, Patricia had seen something in his eyes, not cruelty, but a terrifying emptiness. Like a room that had never been furnished, a capacity that had never been developed. The memory faded, and Marcus was weeping openly now, understanding for the first time the true cost of his life. Not the money he'd lost, but the connections he'd never made, the love he'd never learned to give. My son, he gasped. Is he... double quotes, he lived, the angel said gently. He learned to survive in a world that felt cold because the first world he knew, his home, was winter. He became a teacher. He helps children who are struggling, who feel unseen. He became what he needed and never had, because of me. Because I failed him. Because despite you, the angel corrected, but also because the shape of the wound you left taught him what never to do. Pain, when transformed, can become wisdom. Marcus looked through the gates again. Thomas was still there, still planting, but now Marcus could see others joining him. Dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands. Each one someone Thomas had touched, had seen, had loved into being more fully themselves. He made a garden of people, Marcus whispered. I made a desert. You made what you made, the angel agreed. The question now is, what would you make if given another chance? Not to earn salvation, that was never the transaction, but simply to be human. Truly, fully human. The snow was falling faster now, each flake carrying within it a possibility. A moment where choice could become different, where the calcified heart could crack and let in light. Marcus stood in this snow, feeling it on his face, and for the first time in decades he felt something other than the weight of accumulation or the performance of poverty. He felt present. I don't know if I can change, Marcus said honestly. The patterns are so deep. The way I see the world, everything is numbers, as transactions, as leverage. Change is not a sudden thing, the angel said. It's a direction, not a destination. Thomas didn't become who he was overnight. He chose, moment by moment, to see people, to let his heart break for them, to give not from surplus but from center. Through the gates, Thomas had stopped planting. He was walking toward them now, his hands still dirty with soil, his expression unreadable. When he reached the boundary, that shimmer between heaven and earth, he stopped. Marcus Chun, Thomas said, and his voice was clear, carrying across the space between. I know who you are. Marcus's heart clenched. You do? Mercy General Hospital, 20 years ago. My mother was there when you bought it. She was in the cancer ward, the children's cancer ward. The world seemed to stop. Even the falling snow held still. She was a nurse, Thomas continued. She'd worked there 30 years. When you converted the ward, she was let go. Not fired. That would be too crude. Just made redundant. At 57, too old to start over easily, too young to retire, Marcus felt as if he were being turned inside out, every choice he'd made becoming visible, tangible, real. She died 3 years later, Thomas said, working at a for-profit clinic where she couldn't give the kind of care she wanted to give. She'd lie awake at night thinking about the children who had nowhere to go for treatment after you closed that ward. I'm sorry, Marcus whispered, and the words felt absurdly inadequate, like trying to fill an ocean with a teaspoon. I'm so sorry. I know, Thomas said, and then impossibly he smiled. I forgave you 12 years ago. On Christmas Eve, when I was planting the 7th playground, I realized I was carrying your choice like a stone in my pocket, letting it weigh me down. So I put it down. Not for you, for me. Marcus couldn't speak. The generosity of it was incomprehensible. But forgiveness isn't the same as erasure, Thomas continued. The children who died because they had no treatment, they still died. The lives altered by your choices, they're still altered. Forgiveness doesn't undo. It just refuses to let the past poison the future. Then what can I do? Marcus asked desperately. If I can't undo it, can't earn forgiveness, can't transaction my way to redemption, what's left? Thomas looked at him for a long moment, then back at the garden where people were still planting, still growing, still becoming. You can plant, Thomas said simply. Not to harvest salvation, but because planting is what humans do. We put seeds in dark earth and hope for light. We tend what's growing. We water what's struggling. We celebrate what blooms. Not because it earns us anything, but because that's what it means to be alive. The angel moved then, and the gates still closed began to transform. Not opening, but becoming transparent, letting Marcus see fully what lay beyond. It wasn't a place of golden streets or jeweled walls. It was a garden, yes, but also a city, but also a home, but also something that had no earthly equivalent. It was wherever love had dwelt and continued to dwell. It was the kitchen where Maria now baked bread and shared it freely. It was the swing where children played infinitely. It was the bedside where Eleanor read poetry to others who were traveling. It was every space that had been transformed by genuine connection, by love given without calculation. Heaven isn't a reward, the angel said softly. It's a continuation. Thomas entered because he was already living there. Every act of genuine kindness, every moment of seeing another truly, these were already heaven breaking through. The gates just recognized what was already true in hell. Marcus asked, though he feared the answer. Is living forever in the calcified heart, the angel said. Trapped in the endless accounting, the eternal transaction, never able to give or receive because you're always measuring, always keeping score. Hell isn't fire, it's ice. The frozen heart alone with its accomplishments. Marcus looked at his hands. They were neither the hands of the billionaire nor the beggar, but something in between. Capable hands. Scarred hands. Human hands. I want to plant, he said quietly. Not there. He gestured to the gates. I don't think I've earned entry, and I finally understand that's not the point, but somewhere, somehow, can souls, do they get second chances? Not to earn, but to become. The angel and Thomas exchanged a look that held millennia of understanding. There's a place, Thomas said finally. Not quite here, not quite there. A garden on the edge, where those who are learning to see, learning to love, learning to be human, where they can practice. It's not paradise, but it's not exile either. It's purgatory, Marcus asked. Kindergarten, Thomas corrected with a gentle smile. Where you learn by doing, where mistakes are expected, where growth is the whole point. The snow around them began to change, becoming less like snow and more like seeds. Tiny potential, waiting. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not the cracking he'd felt before, but a softening, like frozen ground beginning to thaw. Your son, Thomas said. David. He plants gardens too now. Therapy gardens at schools. Helps children who are struggling grow things with their hands while they heal their hearts. You gave him the wound, but he transformed it into medicine. Marcus's tears fell freely now, watering the seed snow at his feet. Where each tear landed, something small and green began to push through, not fully formed, not yet blooming, but alive, growing. Can I see him? Marcus asked. Not to ask forgiveness, I don't deserve that. Just to see that he's okay. That despite me, because of me, in spite of me, that he made something beautiful. The angel raised its hand and the light shifted. Suddenly Marcus could see down, not to heaven, but to earth. A school playground, winter sun bright on snow. David older now, his face carrying the lines of someone who had suffered and chosen to grow from it rather than harden, was kneeling beside a small girl, helping her plant bulbs in a winter garden. These won't bloom until spring, David was saying gently. Here, you have to wait. But waiting isn't doing nothing, it's letting the magic happen in the dark. Trust the process. The little girl may be 7, with eyes that had seen too much carefully patted soil over the bulb. What if they don't grow? Then we plant again, David said simply. We keep planting. That's the secret nobody tells you. You don't have to succeed every time. You just have to keep trying. Marcus watched his son, this man he had wounded, teaching a wounded child to hope. The generosity of it, the grace of it, the sheer stubborn beauty of it broke something in Marcus that needed breaking. I want to plant, Marcus said again, and this time his voice was clear, not to earn, not to prove, just to add one small green thing to the world, to try to grow something besides portfolios and profits, to be ... human. The angel nodded slowly. Then go to the garden on the edge. Learn, grow, become, not the millionaire, not the beggar, but Marcus Chun, human, flawed, trying. And if someday your heart opens enough, if you learn to see rather than calculate, if you become the kind of soul that naturally tends what's growing around you, these gates will recognize what you've become. And if I fail, then you'll have tried, Thomas said. And trying with genuine heart is worth more than succeeding with calculated intent. I'll be watching, cheering for you, hoping you find what I found, that joy isn't in accumulation but in connection, not in earning but in being. The snow seeds were falling faster now, covering everything in potential. Marcus felt himself beginning to fade, not dying but transforming, moving from this between place to whatever came next. The kindergarten, the garden on the edge, the place where souls learned to be human. As he faded, he heard the angel's voice one last time. Remember, Marcus Chun, the gates were never locked. They just wait for hearts that are ready to enter. Not perfect hearts, but open ones. Not calculating hearts, but generous ones. Go, learn, grow, and then he was gone, leaving only footprints in the seed snow, and those footprints were already beginning to sprout. Somewhere far below on earth, another Christmas Eve was unfolding. In a small church on Christmas Eve, a young pastor was giving a sermon. His name was James Washington, and he had been pastor now for 20 years at the church across from the lot where a playground once mysteriously appeared. "We think heaven is about being good enough," he was saying to a small congregation, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned truth through living rather than studying. "We think there's some cosmic scoreboard, some divine accountant adding up our good deeds and bad ones, seeing if we balance out. But that's not love, that's business. And God isn't doing business, God is doing love. God is looking for hearts that know how to love, that choose to see that risk connection despite the cost. I think of the millionaire who built a playground here years ago. Anonymous gift. No strings attached. Didn't do it to earn anything. He did it because he saw children who needed a place to play. That's heaven breaking through. That's what the kingdom looks like. And I think of another man, one I heard about but never met. They say he was rich once, then poor by choice, trying to earn his way to salvation through suffering. They say he died recently, alone, still trying to purchase grace with pain. I hope he learned," James said softly, his eyes on the candlelight flickering in the dim church. "I hope somewhere, somehow, that soul realized, you can't buy love. You can only become love. You can only open yourself until there's room for others inside you." Outside, snow was falling. Real snow now, earth snow, covering the playground in white silence. Each flake was just a flake, not carrying cosmic meaning, just being what it was, cold, beautiful, temporary, perfect. In a hospital across town, a nurse was holding the hand of a dying patient who had no one else. The nurse didn't know it, but this moment was heaven. In a shelter downtown, a volunteer was serving soup to people whose names she bothered to learn. Heaven. In 1,000 homes, people were choosing kindness over convenience, connection over comfort, love over fear. Heaven, breaking through. And in a garden on the edge of everywhere and nowhere, Marcus Chun was kneeling in dark soil, planting his first seed. His hands were shaking. He didn't know what he was doing. He might fail completely, but he was trying. And somewhere beyond the gates that waited patiently for hearts to bloom open, Thomas smiled. The snow kept falling in heaven and on earth, covering everything in the possibility of spring. "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in." Matthew 25 minutes and 35 seconds.